How's it going, everyone? Today is September 30th of 2022. In last night's Thursday night football game between the Miami Dolphins and Cincinnati Bengals, Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa suffered a scary injury after he was thrown to the ground by Bengals lineman Josh Tupou. This was the second head injury in about 4 days for Tua, and it provided a scary scene for NFL fans. In this video, we're going to talk about the amazing numeric alignments in this incident that occurred last night and how it connects to astrology. Down in the description below, you can find a little presentation, a great example of how Gematria is coded into the geometry of the sun, moon, and earth together. And even in a video I did yesterday on the death of Coolio, which is also linked below, we talk about something called the Brown lunation number, which is the count that we give every new moon that began back in 1923. For instance, Coolio died during lunation number 1234, and one of his singles off of Gangsta's Paradise was called 1234. He was parodied by Al Yankovic, who recently had a big movie come out, or is coming out. Notice how the name Al Yankovic has this 1234. We're going to talk a lot about this today. For anyone new to the channel, we talk about the language of Gematria, the practice of coding numbers into words, names, phrases, and the like, and how this all connects to dates on the calendar, both here on Earth and in orbit with the planets, and particularly the moon. So, for instance, let's look at the name Tua Tagovailoa, the quarterback who was hurt last night. Notice how he has the same ordinal gematria as Josh Tupou, the name of the lineman who knocked him out during the game last night. Here we simply assign a number to each letter relative to its position in the alphabet, 1 through 26. The names Tua Tagovailoa and Josh Tupou both summing to 145. In a cipher called single reduction, where every double-digit number is added together to reduce it down to a single digit, the name Josh Tupou sums to 46, just like Tua Tagovailoa. And what makes this 46 stand out in particular is that if you measure from the birthday of Tagovailoa on March 2nd of 1998 to the birthday of Josh Tupou on May 2nd of 1994, by virtue of both men being born on the second day of the month, they're born exactly 46 months apart, which is the name they curiously share in the language of Gematria. But this opens up a world to a whole new layer of synchronicity with this incident last night. If you instead add these two names together, notice how you get a reverse value of 304. And 304 is a curious number because in that same cipher, the number 304 is one of just a handful that sums to itself in Gematria. And it's a number that belongs to Tua Tagovailoa as well. He was born on March 2nd, which is the date that leaves 304 days on our Gregorian calendar. Measuring between the birthdays of Tua Tagovailoa and Josh Tupou, notice how their birthdays are separated by 304 days on the calendar. On top of this, Josh Tupou was also 340 months old, which has the same digits. But this is where things get a little strange. On the date of last night's game, Tua Tagovailoa was exactly 304 lunations old. A lunation is what we also call a lunar phase or a synodic month, which is a period of 29.5 days approximately, measuring from new moon to new moon. And this is what gives us the lunation count, the Brown lunation number. So Tua, 304 lunar phases old. So why do we call it the Brown lunation number? This is what we're looking at here on timeanddate.com. In the early 1900s, an astronomer named Ernest did some research and wound up numbering moons beginning in January of 1923. And his work was adopted and published in many almanacs and many astrology sites to this very day. Notice how the name Ernest Brown, with capital letters, also has gematria of 304. This cipher uses the standard alphabetic order, but intermingles capital letters with small letters. Measuring from what would have been Ernest Brown's birthday on November 29th to the date of the game last night, we find it was 304 days after his birthday. And what makes this especially interesting is that the man who tackled Tua Tagovailoa plays for the Bengals, a team which was founded by a man named Paul Brown, the founder and longtime coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. So clearly there's something going on with the number 304 here. Notice how in larger forms of gematria, the number 304 has matching values with Brown lunation, 1225. The National Football League, which was founded in the year 1920, is currently in its 1225th month since its inception. Now, if you think that's a coincidence, what about this? Because 1920 was the first season of the NFL, that means this year is the 103rd season in the history of the NFL. Tua Tagovailoa used to play for Alabama in college, and notice how Alabama sums to 13, which syncs up with 103 in numerology. The name Tagovailoa sums to 103 in the alphabetic order. 103 is what we call a prime number, the 27th prime. And the Bengals in last night's game won with a final score of 27 points. And if you actually add these two scores, you find there was a total of 42 points scored in the game. And the name Tua, which is what the crowd was chanting as he was leaving the field, sums to 42 in ordinal. Tua Tagovailoa was born on March 2nd of 1998. Let's look up the Brown lunation number for that month. Doing so tells us that he was born during lunation number 930. And that stuck out to me right away because by the time the game ended last night, it was just about 9:30 on the East Coast. The date, September 30th, written 9:30. In fact, the date of the game, September 29th, is the date that leaves 93 days on the calendar. The man who tackled him has gematria of 930 and 93 in gematria. In addition to ordinal, there's also the standard method, which mirrors the ancient Hebrew and Greek isopsephy charts. And right after I pointed this out to a friend of mine, number 93 came up and blocked a field goal just a few plays later on the same drive that Tagovailoa was injured. There's number 93 blocking the kick. I found a very interesting riddle connected to Freemasonry. The National Football League was established by a Freemason. I think it was Walter Camp, who's primarily credited with the invention of the sport and the creation of the league, at least. Now, if you look up the ancient and accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry, ancient and accepted Scottish rite, notice how it often omits the and. So if we remove the and from this phrase, I want you to notice this gematria of 1866 in the Latin method. 1866 is the year that Ernest Brown, the inventor of the Brown lunation number, was born. And he was born on the 333rd day of the year. 333, the gematria of a famous Masonic motto. The purpose of their compass is to circumscribe our desires and keep our passions within due bounds. Now notice how Freemasonry also has this gematria of 227. Ernest Brown would go on to pass away on the 22nd of July, or 22/7. Furthermore, Freemasonry has reduction gematria of 187, a number commonly associated with death. Think about 187 from certain rap songs back in the 90s. Well, if you measure from his birth to last night's game, it was exactly 1,870 months. All right, one more thing I want to cover in this video is how last night's game took place in Cincinnati, Ohio. And as I've exposed many times on this channel, Cincinnati, Ohio is heavily connected to the Metonic cycle. And there's a couple reasons for this. First of all, the Metonic cycle is made up of 254 sidereal months. The difference between a sidereal and synodic month is just a couple of days. Whereas a synodic month measures the time between new moon to new moon, a sidereal month measures the time it takes the moon to pass the same star in the sky. So that period is a little bit shorter. And there's something called a Metonic cycle, which represents the connection between these two different cycles. So the Metonic cycle is a period of 254 sidereal months. Amazingly, they removed the number 254 from this page. But you can get this by adding the number of years on the solar calendar to the number of synodic months. 19 plus 235 is 254. And Cincinnati has gematria of 254. In fact, in English gematria, the word time sums to 254. So does light. The Metonic cycle also has 235 synodic months, and when you write out Cincinnati, Ohio, it sums to 235 in reverse. The name Ernest William Brown, the man credited with this significant lunar cycle count, his name sums to 254, just like Cincinnati. And measuring from his birthday to the date that he died was 235 days, the other Metonic cycle number. This means Brown died 130 days before his next birthday. The Metonic cycle represents the connection between the sun and moon. Notice how sun and moon sums to 130. A number familiar as Tagovailoa equals 103. We're in the NFL's 103rd season. Now, had Brown made it to his next birthday, he would have been 72 years old. Notice how Brown equals 72, 1072. In fact, 702 in Standard English. Now notice how Brown's next birthday, if he were still alive, which of course nobody would be, but his next birthday would be his 156th. And I point this out because Cincinnati Bengals equals 156. And it would have been 61 days before that birthday. Brown Lunation, 61. Maybe I'm getting carried away. Let's move on. Last night's game had what we call primary numerology of 80. You get this by adding the primary digits of the date, 9 plus 29 plus 20 plus 22. The number 80 is the reverse reduction value of Tua Tagovailoa. We talked a lot about the number 304, which also sums to 80. Last night's game was in Cincinnati, Ohio, which equals 80. They hosted Dolphins head coach Mike McDaniel, whose full name also equals 80. And notice how the number 46 equals 80. Again, that's the number of months between the birthdays of Tua Tagovailoa and Josh Tupou. Both of their names summing to 46 as well. And I believe I made it through that entire video without saying Tua Tagovailoa. Oops. Hope he gets better. Sorry, everyone. Talk to you next time. Peace, love, God bless. See ya.